Hey, TJEd.
Hi,
Rachel DeMille.
Emma Cox.
We're here to talk about scholar contracts. And I think this is a very welcome conversation because it comes up a lot in the TJEd discussion group. And in our experience, it's something that's been hugely important as a communication tool, as something that helps to ensure the effectiveness of the way our family education culture runs. I want to get right down to the nitty-gritty. First of all, let's talk about what a scholar contract is for. It's not for pre-scholars. It's one of those things that if you do it before it's time, it becomes watered down, less effective, and it can taint both sides of that equation.
Yeah, I mean, it really does. It hurts both the love of learning experience and the scholar phase experience.
Because what happens if you have a contract in love of learning? Why would you call that a problem?
Well, on the one hand, you're forced by your parents to be accountable and do it, or on the other hand, you're not forced, and then you create all these bad habits of not doing it. The purpose of a scholar contract is to create a level of accountability that is actually upheld by both parties. And so when you're in love of learning, it's supposed to be a little bit more fluid. It's supposed to be a little bit more optional. It's supposed to be as it's fun and not when it's not. And so by creating something that is this structure that's a commitment on both sides, you're setting yourself up for failure. Because when you're in a scholar contract, when you're in scholar phase, there ought to be a point where if you haven't fulfilled your commitments, you've actually broken a trust, right? Where you've actually done something wrong, and that there needs to be recompense, that there needs to be a different experience afterwards. But love of learning kids really aren't ready for that, and they shouldn't be.
Yeah, when learning and love of learning becomes defined by the moral values of you didn't measure up or you did it wrong, then because of where they are at emotionally, developmentally, that totally can short circuit the love of learning. Now listen, there actually is a way to have the kind of structure that people are seeking when they tend to use a scholar contract in love of learning. And we talk about that elsewhere. The YSS program is really, really ideal for creating that kind of communication device, the goal-setting medium, the mentoring and the follow-through that people like to see. But it's not a scholar contract. So please don't call it that and don't use it as such. If you want something with that type of feeling that's more tooled to the love of learning needs and developmental timeline, YSS is a much, much better model.
Well, because the structure that exists and can exist in a love of learning should be all about, like you said, goals and achievements. It's all about the positive, right? And there's really a difference between a goal and achieving that goal and having a scholar contract. A contract is very different from a goal, right? And so, because the goal is like you shoot for it, you do your best, and if you don't, too bad. And
what else did we get out of this? This is
exactly.
So,
but a
contract should have specifics that define what success is and is not, and those definitions are perfect for scholar phase. So let's talk about what is a very basic level scholar phase contract. It has a few features that I think most contracts will do well to consider. First of all, it should define the scholar's privileges in the home, their responsibilities in the home, targets for what their minimum level of study is in time. Will it be a certain number of hours per week or a certain number of hours per day? Is there some other way you want to define it? It doesn't have to be defined by hours, but I think ultimately that is, in almost every case, the most meaningful, universally understood measure. So I would recommend it being in terms of hours per day or per week.
It's also, I think, the best way to do it in a way that really does fit the needs of the scholar at every level of scholar phase. Even if they're just starting out in scholar phase, again, but not practicing scholar phase or pre-scholar, but truly at the beginning of what is their real, genuine scholar phase. Again, doing a measurement of hours allows them to have the flexibility to study differently, but just to build the habit and the ability to study long, hard hours.
So someone who's just barely starting with a scholar contract might study an hour and 45 minutes on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and 2 hours and 30 minutes on Tuesday and Thursday. Doesn't that sound like something that you would have done in a very...
Again, it's the early, that's the beginning. By measuring it that way, it just allows for that clear picture of what's wanted without bogging down with a whole bunch of structure that really it does a disservice at that early stage. But then even as you get into later scholar phase, where the hours might look more like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day, or depending on the day of the week, even when you get there, the measurement in hours still is it's a measuring stick that really is clear and it just makes sense.
Right. Now, when you're talking about, the minimums in terms of time, it's also really important to get clarity on what counts toward the minimum. For one student, it might be anything that they're reading counts. Or for another student, it might be anything but not graphic novels. Or anything but not this author that is just kind of brain candy, and I could spend all my time in that, but I'm not really branching out. But it has an element of being totally doable and an element of pushing me to take the next step. For some students, it might not include their piano practice, or it might not include whatever. It's important to realize that scholar phase, really the bulk of scholar phase, to really be a part of the great conversation, to develop your skills in persuasion, in understanding human nature, in your ability to learn from other people. It really is about read, and discuss. There are other things that can and should be a part of that youth's life that you can call it a part of their scholar phase because they're in scholar phase. But the essence of scholar phase is a study. The actual in the books study, pen in hand, taking notes, making margin notes, maybe writing, that's scholar phase. The other things are the seasoning, they're the platter that you serve it on, they're the things that you serve it with, whatever. They may be really important parts, but if they become defined as scholar phase, too often they will take the place of scholar phase. So, while we're just getting started in scholar phase, we want to talk about what a scholar day looks like and what a non-scholar day looks like. And that's something that you and your scholar will define. Because the transition to scholar phase is something that should be looked on as an opportunity, as a rite of passage. It's got privileges and perks, and it's got responsibilities and accountability. And sometimes you feel like you totally want to do that, and sometimes you just want to be a kid. You want to take off. And listen, taking off that time isn't a concession. It's not a reflection of immaturity. It's not a reflection of the lack of commitment. It's a part of the natural ebb and flow that every scholar phase should have. Emma, do you ever take love of learning days?
Yeah, absolutely.
How old are you?
How old am I? 27.
27. So do your kids ever have days where they are more involved in work and more involved in play?
Yeah.
We all do.
I think that's just the natural living a full life.
Right. And so I think sometimes as parents, we go through this whole process of creating a great core, great love of learning, great transition to scholar, and we think, okay, now that they're in scholar phase, now it's going to look like a conveyor belt. And we look for uniformity as a sign of our success. And that's not really the case. Not only should each day look maybe a little bit different than the one before because it's still informed by that love of learning, and there's still an element of following the interest and what makes sense in terms of that rabbit trail. But there's also times where that scholar energy is not the right energy. It's time to pull back and focus on relationships, or time to pull back and focus on physical fitness or whatever. So they might have a day where they don't hit the book so hard, and they have a love of learning day, and they go play basketball with the kids outside, or they read to the nephew, and they just take a love of learning day. And that is totally positive. It's not a concession. It's not a failure. It's actually part of a successful whole and should be celebrated in that spirit.
Now, speaking to the youth side of it, though, it's important as the youth in that situation to remember the big picture of what the goal is, right? you do want to get those 5,000 hours of rigorous, intense study. And so if you find that you're just making excuses or you're pretending to be in scholar phase when you're really not doing the work, that's something to think about. That's something to really ponder on and say, okay, am I not really ready for scholar phase? Do I need to rethink this? Do I need to renegotiate things? Or is it that I am ready and I just need to hold myself to that higher standard? Because it is possible to take too many love of learning days. And that can be something that's an agreement between the parent and the scholar. But certainly it should be something on the scholar's mind that you're thinking of that as you go through, of saying, part of scholar phase is really practicing and developing the habits and the skills that you need to be a successful adult. And if you find that you're just sort of bowing out of the responsibilities and the goals and the commitments that you are making too often, that's something to realize, and that's something to consider, and that's something to remember, that you can hold yourself to a little bit higher standard. And if you're finding that you're not just embracing the ebbs and flows of life, but going a little bit too easy on yourself, it is okay for you to say, all right, you know what? I'm a scholar and I can do hard things, and I want to challenge myself to be a little bit more in.
And in the youth conference, I actually give a talk that really, invites the scholar, hold their own feet to the fire. You can't make excuses for the less than perfect circumstances for your scholar phase. Because guess what? They don't exist, those perfect circumstances. Not for scholars, anywhere, ever. Not for parents who are trying to work, if you're waiting for the perfect circumstance for you to really put forth your best effort, not only are you wasting a lot of time, you're waiting for something that's never going to come.
Well, yeah, I said that in another talk about the scholar phase for the non-traditional learner. When it comes down to it, anybody who ever got a scholar phase, realistically, did it against the grain. They did it, despite their weaknesses, despite their natural aptitude, they said, nevertheless, I will do this. And so it took a whole lot of grit, a whole lot of willpower, and a whole lot of working in ways that weren't natural and that were hard, but were worth it. And so that's something to remember as you go through this. It's not that it's anytime it feels hard, don't do it. That's called love of learning, right? And that's okay. And it's okay to be in love of learning, but when you're in scholar phase, it's important to remember the difference. Yes, it's okay to take a break sometimes. Yes, it's okay to have a love of learning day sometimes. But it's important to remember that it's not just anytime you don't want to, you don't feel like it, you don't feel excited about it, or it gets hard. That's not the way to get a scholar phase. It's a part of scholar phase to take a break sometimes, but it's also a part of scholar phase to push through other times.
That's right. And if you find that your scholar is tending toward a lot of love of learning days, this is perhaps normal at the very beginning, but if it persists, then I think it would be time for me to ask myself, what am I doing that's putting so much friction on them really digging into scholar phase? Because as a parent, we can sabotage it. And this is one of the most important things about a scholar contract, quite honestly, is to really clarify for me as a parent, what is it that I need to do to get out of my scholar's way? If the scholar is not finding the scholar phase the scholar days to be attractive, what is it you're doing? Are you calling them away from their studies constantly? What's the situation? In fact, we have a presentation here on the transition to scholar and how to get your kids to actually do scholar phase. Check that one out, because you can do kind of your own self-assessment on what can I do to make the transition into scholar phase have less friction and be more natural and
more motivating,
more attractive, more incentivized for the scholar. So look at that.
And by the way, the things that we do to get in our scholar's way can be, it can be things like interrupting them a lot. It can be things like over-structuring what does a scholar day look like. Sometimes it really is a matter of saying, okay, if they're reading, even if they're reading Brandon Sanderson, if they're reading it for 15 hours and we have to literally pull them away to make them sleep at night, that's something to consider, right?
Yeah, part of scholar phase is learning how to study long and hard and effectively. And at some point, check out my son Oliver's video on the convention here on his science. That's a boy who read hours and hours and hours in science fiction in his early years. Now, he was dyslexic, so we were like, you know what, he's reading, leave the boy alone. So that was art, but it turned out that he gained an aptitude for studying long, hard, and effectively that later served him as his maturity said, you know what, I want to branch out. I'm ready to do hard things. I'm ready to learn things that are new to me, that are unfamiliar to me. And that's part of the process.
And it's amazing how true that is in so many cases, dyslexic or not, how often our motto should be, you know what, the kid's reading, let him go. You know, another thing that we sometimes do to sabotage the scholar faith is to try to involve them too much in the family activities. And again, we say, oh, well, it's a family activity. Of course they should participate. And sometimes that's true, but it's important to remember that there should be the question. There should be a defined understanding of what activities in the family they participate.
Do they come for family prayer and then they're excused? They can stay for kids' school if they want to, or they can just leave. Do they participate in family work, or do they have their own defined zone that's theirs to do, or their own defined responsibility that's not, the parameters don't include how long it takes the family to get through the family work? There's a place for all of this, and it's a discussion that you have in FEC. It's a discussion that you have with your scholar, and figure out what works. And if something's not working, look to things like the interruptions, like the family routine. In our house, the scholar had a lot of autonomy on whether or not they intersected with the family during the middle of the day, and they intersected more specifically at the ends and beginnings of the day for things like family prayer and meals and whatnot. So one of the things, back to the very basic elements of the scholar contract, one of the things that it's important to include is an emergency clause. Now this is where the parental prerogative can be exercised to say, okay, scholar contract works between the mentor and the scholar, but above that is the parent and the youth. And there are times when the parent will say, I'm going to suspend the scholar contract because I've got to run so-and-so to the hospital and you're in charge. Or I need to suspend the scholar contract today because I'm sick and I would like you to blah, right? It can be things like that. It can be something that I just need you for 15 minutes. The thing is, this is one of those tricky spots where the parent often overdoes it because you've got this kid, and maybe you have several more beyond that are younger. You've got this oldest kid that's so responsible and so has knows how to do everything around the house. And it's really tempting when things get complicated. Maybe you're having a hard homeschool day. It would be really easy to say, I need you to watch the baby so I can do this project with the Love of Learning kids. Might not be the best call. Maybe once in a while it's the right thing. I don't know, you will. But you really have to be super careful and hold that time sacred. Imagine yourself calling your husband home from work, if you will, and saying, I need you to watch the baby so I can finish this Love of Learning project with the kids. Would you do it? You would if you had to run somebody to the hospital. You would maybe if I'm really sick and I just can't today. But you probably wouldn't just to do a project. You'd push through and you kids would just figure it out as if there weren't an oldest child.
Now, talking to it from the youth side, when parents exercise, when they kick in that parental prerogative clause, it's our job in the home to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. Because at the end of the day, they're still the parent. And you're still the youth. You're still the kid. And that part of the contract is key to say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, and you kick in and you do it, and you're responsible and you're just there for them. That, I think,
that is part of being a young adult in the home.
That's what it means. Contract or no contract, they're your parents and you get to obey. That said, parents, it's really important to realize that and to not usurp power over our children's lives in that way, not misuse that authority. I like that you brought it into, would you call your husband home from work? Because part of the point of this contract is for the student, for the youth, to really be respected and treated as an adult, because they're now taking on those adult responsibilities of getting a superb education. And if their part of the contract is met, and we're just constantly interrupting them, and using our authority as a parent, then, I mean, it's just really sad, Not only does it hurt their ability to not only get a scholar phase, but to even want to invest in getting a scholar phase. But on top of that, it really is teaching them habits of, when you have authority, you get to just do what you want, no matter what commitments you've made, right?
And either they're taking on that kind of attitude toward authority, or their trust and respect in our integrity is challenged.
None of those things are very good. Now, if we find that one party or the other, either parents are invoking that prerogative too often, or that it seems like the kids really aren't doing the studies very often, they kind of are under this guise of, well, don't interrupt me, I'm in scholar phase, but they're just, not really studying, then that needs to come up. That needs to be a discussion. Nevertheless, in the moment, the mentality shouldn't be, well, they're breaking the contract, well, I'm going to break the contract.
Right.
But rather, they're breaking the contract, I'm still going to do what I committed to do, and this is going to come up in a meeting. We're going to make sure to discuss this. Do we need to redefine? Do there need to be the teeth of the contract coming in here? Do we need to just kick them right back to love of learning? What needs to happen? But in the moment, the mentality should be, whatever anybody else does, I will follow through on my commitments. I will do what is mine to do. And then later on, we will discuss what needs to happen.
That right there, that is the principled way to handle it. That is the principled way to handle it. That way it doesn't escalate into a relationship conflict. You're showing this is how we deal with misunderstandings, with disagreements, when parties have different interests that are in conflict. That you don't cause an issue in the moment. You have already established a time where the communication is expected and the right thing to do. You handle it that way. So those are the kind of the basics. We talked about this.
You kind of just barely mentioned it, but probably we should address it a little bit more.
So we need a scheduled check-in on the contract for two things. The first one is for how did the contract go? How did the study go? This is a perfect thing for a weekly interview with the parent mentor and the scholar. Then you talk about what was studied, what was learned, and let me just say, in our house, more informal interviews happened a lot more frequently than weekly. In particular, they would kind of wander into Dad's room where he's sitting in his big chair and say, "Can I just talk to you a second about this thing?" And then and he's read most everything that they could possibly ever try with me. So that was convenient on our part. But it doesn't have to be that you've read everything that the scholar will ever attempt in order for you to have, your own informed opinion on principles and people and, how it applies to real life and stuff like that. So having these sort of impromptu, informal moments where discuss comes up is wonderful. That being said, it's still appropriate, even though those things are happening, to have a weekly check-in where you specifically say, how did we do on the contract this week? Did you feel like you kept your part of it? Do you have any concerns about the way the week went? And you get to listen in a respectful, equals on a contract way, talk about how we did. I would say it's really important before that meeting for you as a parent to evaluate your emergency clause prerogatives. And ask yourself, did I do right? Did I do well? And if you did not do right and well, and any particular one of them, and any one of them, make mention of it. You make mention of it in the meeting and say, I just want to say, I felt like this time that I did that emergency clause probably wasn't the best way to do it. And I really apologize for that. I'd like to make amends. I got you this little coupon on Amazon, and just find yourself a book that you'd love. And it doesn't have to be money. It could be just an apology, but some sort of acknowledgement, as you would with equals. We agreed to something. I failed in it. I did not hold up the spirit of it because of the way I handled this. I'd like to recognize your effort, your commitment to it by, giving up a little bit, whether it's in terms of humility or an actual, go get yourself an ice cream cone type thing.
And depending on the situation, both of those will be appropriate at different times, just as they would be with that type of a minor or less minor breach of contract with an adult. Again, when something like that happens, when you're dealing with an adult, you take care of them, whether it's just the humility to apologize and acknowledge it, or in other cases say, let me make it up to you. I'll take you to lunch sometime. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's absolutely important to see this on equal terms in that situation. In fact, that said, it should also be a safe place where the youth should be able to say, hey, you know, Mom, I really felt like this time that you used that parental prerogative, I don't know, to me, maybe it's because I didn't understand what you were going through. Maybe I didn't understand what was happening, but I really felt like that was a little bit out of line. And I felt like that wasn't really in the spirit of what our scholar contract means.
So, and if you are the youth in that situation, I think your first assumption has to be, please explain to me how this worked. I don't mean to be disrespectful. It's a complicated relationship. You already know this. You've got to be careful to approach that in a way that's respectful and
because they are your parents.
Yeah. In this case, even though, quote unquote, you're on equal terms on the contract, you and I both know, outside of this conversation, they're still the parent, and you've got to be careful not to say something in a way that you're going to be sorry later.
Or that you should be sorry.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. No matter what contract you have, there's some honor and there's some respect that is due to them as your parents. Mm-hmm. And that consideration should not be ignored. And so it's important, even if you feel like they are in breach of contract, it's important for this relationship to work, but it's acceptable for you to bring that up. But when you do, and as you do, it is also key that you remember the respect and honor that is due to them as your parents. And it's important that you remember to give them the benefit of the doubt. Yes, it's okay to address it because that's part of being an adult. You address problems when they come. And if they can just be moved on from, then they need to be addressed, right? If it's not just something that's like, okay, whatever, that wasn't a thing, move on, then it should be addressed, that both parties have an opportunity to truly come together on it and
communicate
understand
on it.
Understand
another's point of view.
And so when that happens, go ahead and talk about it. It's important. And the parents, it's important to be able to have that be a safe place where the youth can stand up for themselves a little bit in terms of the contract so that they can understand where you're coming from.
You got to look at that like you look at your little child learning to walk and how proud you are when they stand up and take the first steps. You're trying to create a youth who can advocate for themselves in a situation that maybe is uncomfortable, where they are perhaps not on equal power footing with someone, where they're able to speak truth to power. You want that youth. Remember that when these uncomfortable conversations happen. Have some humility. Tell them how proud you are that they were able to bring up that conversation that maybe wasn't easy for them, and how proud you are. Look for a way to praise them for the way they did it. Even if because a lot of people, to muster up the courage to say something hard automatically puts them in a negative place. They have to muster some aggressiveness in order to speak. That's something that they learn over time, how to speak without the aggressiveness. But praise them for the having the courage to speak and let them grow in it. Give them the opportunity to get better at it.
And again, we can't stress it enough. If you're the youth in the situation, remember who you're talking to. Yes, there's a contract, and yes, it is appropriate on a certain level to try to make sure that you're understanding and that the contract is met effectively by both parties. But remember, at the end of the day, no matter how much they use that parental prerogative, no matter whatever happened, they're your parents, and there's a certain respect and honor due there. And it's not just because you'll get in trouble if you're mean.
It's the right way to be.
It just simply is. The thing is, part of what makes, great leaders who they are is that ability to truly recognize that despite faults, flaws, mistakes, shortcomings, there are people to whom honor is due. And that what they've done, what they've sacrificed, what they've given to you, and just that, it is not only right socially, because otherwise you're in trouble. It is simply right to honor them for what they have done.
It makes you a nobler person. So, next point on this. That's the basic, nitty-gritty of the scholar contract. We talked about defining what is and isn't counted in the study time. And it's important that we don't structure too closely the study time. Now, as you get into the specifics of a particular student's scholar contract, there might be a reason or a time when it has some specifics built into the contract. I think with almost every one of our kids, at a given time, they decided, okay, I need some accountability. I would like to put some teeth in this contract on writing or math or whatever.
And frankly, there were even times when one of the parents would come and say, hey, you know what? I've been really, in our FEC, we've been really trying to figure out what you need, or I've been doing a blank page for you, and I feel like it's time for me to invite you that I think what your education could use right now is that you really spent a little bit more emphasis on math or writing or reading this type of book. It doesn't have to come from the scholar, but again, it needs to be remembered in the spirit of what.
Right, and then there needs to be buy-in where both parties say, okay, under these circumstances, we both agree to these terms.
I think it's easy to fall into the rut of thinking the scholar phase or the scholar contract is about the parents making the kids study enough. When in reality, it's literally the opposite. The point of the scholar contract, honestly, is to force the parents to allow the kids to study, right?
That's so true.
And it's funny because it's so easy to get into that sort of conveyor belt mentality of, okay, well, we're going to make this contract to make sure that those kids are working. It's the opposite. The scholar contract really is about helping the parents let the student or the scholar study.
And when you do have a situation where it's right to put some specifics into the contract, you do it minimum, and you do it as bare bones as you possibly can, and you do it with a specific purpose and accountability. It might be that you have court supervision for custody type things, and so you've got to make sure certain things are done. Or you have a state regulation that you're accountable to, or you're trying to keep peace for the prerogative to homeschool with the spouse. Whatever, it might be that you have a situation like that. It's totally appropriate to consider between the scholar and the parent mentor. How can we make sure that this is done in a way that is in keeping with that particular guideline or regulation or voice that deserves a vote? So with that, you can say, every day you will this and or that, or this or that, and just put that in the scholar contract, and that becomes part of their accountability in order to be considered in keeping with the scholar and not in mode of learning. So that's the basics, and that's where you can get specific when it's time. We've talked elsewhere about how to create less friction for moving into scholar phase, how to incentivize going into scholar phase. I think it becomes sort of like a perpetual education machine when we really get this thing going right. One of the things I really love about scholar phase is how it creates almost a natural aristocracy in the home. And by that I mean in the spirit of how Jefferson described it, where people automatically rise to their genius, not based on wealth or family lines or opportunities per se, but just by making the choices they make, they rise to privilege. And this is how scholar phase works. Our children rise to privilege based on the choices they make. And when we exercise an effective scholar phase contract with one of our kids, the ones that follow behind look at that as an opportunity. They're like, I don't think I would want to study 6 hours a day, but I see how it would be attractive, and I bet I'll be ready for that later. That whole thing, did that ever happen in your head?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I know it happened in the head of it. Right now, we've just, we're developing a new scholar phase for our 15-year-old, and she's dyslexic and has dyscalculia. Her timeline has been a little bit distinct. But she's one that just last year, she challenged herself to read 100 books. And that was an initiative year where she was just all on her own, making her own goals. This year, she has said, can I please have a scholar contract? Because I want more time to study. Basically what she's saying, and the honest truth is she was sitting in the back seat while my husband and I drove, while I was preparing this talk and writing, having him scribe the notes for me. She said, Mom, did you do that to... She said, at first I heard them talking, and they're like, oh, they're trying to get me to study more. And then she listened, and then she listened, she listened. She's like, I need a scholar contract. So she came to me and said, Mom, any chance we could get me a scholar contract? I'm like, you betcha, honey. And talking with our 13-year-old on how to take up more of the slack so this one could study. And my 13-year-old thinking, okay, she's like already strategizing for when she can get a scholar contract. But it needs to be that kind of attractive. And I don't know, I had one idea when we were talking on this drive. I mean, it might be appropriate for you're sitting down to lunch with your younger family, the kids in their room studying, and you can send a runner to say, hey, Joey, do you want someone to bring you a plate? Or do you want to join us for lunch? That little thing communicates to everybody in the whole family. The kid doing the study feels so taken care of, feels so supported, feels so respected. That kid doing the runner job sees that study as work that we honor, that we celebrate, that we respect, like daddy going to work and bringing home a paycheck. That is the work of a scholar. And everybody's like, that scholar phase student has a certain level of autonomy. They get to make choices for how their time is spent. They have, and we all look forward to the time when we get somebody to bring us a sandwich, or somebody to ask us if there's anything that we need.
It's kind of like the idea of, you have the leadership education bookshelf where they get to enjoy looking up to how beautiful and perfect and pristine those scholar phase books are, and look forward to the day when they're in there. Or like in our home, we always had a special room that was sort of set aside. It was an adult room where maybe we had special guests visiting, then we would sit there for that. Or again, the scholar was allowed to go in there to study, and that was something to look forward to. It's the scholar contract is another way of kind of facilitating that idea of looking up to saying, oh, there's a certain level of privilege, of specialness that comes when you're willing to take on the work of a scholar, that you're treated a little bit differently in the way that you.
And it is a natural aristocracy where it's for being truly noted for your choices. The privilege is not based on, something capricious of nature. It's you chose to take on these responsibilities, so the privileges are entailed.
Yeah, I mean, it's not about age. It's not about who you are. It's not about any of those things. It's about when are you willing to take on that kind of responsibility, and when you are, there's some natural consequences that kick in.
And we talked sort of peripherally about how this sort of works as a perpetual education machine. Not only do the younger ones aspire to be more like the older ones, but all of a sudden, with the vacancy left in that space where they were in the family work or the rotation of family responsibilities, because now they just have, I don't know, maybe they're in charge of all the laundry, or maybe they take on the yard full charge, or whatever the thing is that you decide, something that they can do on their own time, something that they can actually own and be responsible for, that's not super tied to a timeline that depends on other people doing things, right? But by having that type of having them move on to that, then there's like a vacancy left in the pecking order of the family. And the next oldest child very naturally can flow into that role where, okay, now they're the one that gets to try and burp the baby so mom can finish making dinner. Now they're the one that gets to whatever. They become the one to read to the little ones while mom is getting whatever done, instead of it being the scholar. Now the scholar, of course, is probably going to want to opt in on some of those opportunities because those relationships matter, and it's fun.
And they will, they do.
They will, and they do. But and maybe they sometimes come join for family reading, but it's not an expectation. Maybe they join for family work, but it may not be an expectation, and you and your contractor decide that. But as that happens, then we don't have a middle child syndrome anymore. The scholar has moved into young adulthood, and the next oldest child becomes the oldest child. And the oldest child is a thing. And nobody gets to argue whether they get shotgun. They get shotgun, unless the scholar's around. Right? But and the thing that happens then is that the next one moves into scholar phase, and then the next one, and the next one. Ultimately, there's going to be a vacancy at the end where there's nobody left to pass the kid jobs onto. And guess who steps up then? It's the adults in the home that make sure that the scholar still gets the same opportunity. And the bonus is, when you don't have a whole gaggle of younger ones, there's not that many dishes to care for. There's not that much laundry to take care of. There's not that much clutter getting strewn around. It's not that hard for me as a parent to step up. But the spiritual message of, okay, you're not the clutter picker up right now. I am. That's that kind of thing. Like, can I bring you a sandwich?
Now, obviously, if the clutter, leave her around her, is the scholar, then that's something that might be addressed in the responsibilities in that clause of saying, and it's going to be your job to make sure that you're not just leaving your stuff everywhere all the time, right? That, because if all of a sudden mom has to just be cleaning up after the scholar all day, every day, there's something missed there in the scholar's mentality towards the home.
Yeah, that's a core phrase issue that needs to be addressed. So, the last thing that I think is super important to talk about is again, we sort of mentioned this before, but the scholar phase is a study. And there are a lot of things that sometimes we substitute based on busyness or social convention and say, okay, this counts for scholar phase. And again, it might be part of a great life, a great youth, a great teen experience. It might be things that contribute to effective study, that contribute to curiosity and a level of commitment. But it doesn't substitute for it. When you've got a scholar in a bunch of classes, a tendency can be, well, I did all the work that was assigned from my classes, therefore, yay, I'm done for the week.
I'm such a good scholar. It's Monday. I just got home from school and I was able to, or from my classes, and I was able to get all my homework done today, which means I just get to party for the rest of the week and be in love with it.
And aren't I a great scholar because I did all of these scholar classes? Well, you know, the peer relationships there, the opportunities that you have in group environment, those are important. The mentors that you connect with in those situations, those are important.
In fact, sometimes they can make all the difference in your success in scholar phase. As long as you have the mentality, and this is another reason why the setting the times of study is so important, because some people are just naturally really fast at doing certain things, but still doing the hours makes a huge difference in their success as a scholar. So it's not about checking off all the boxes either on a list made by mom and dad or by a list made by some teacher of some class, right? The idea is to study the hours. It's the structured time.
The scholar phase is the time spent studying. That's scholar phase. Not the fact that they're in this many classes, not that they have this online thing that they're doing. That's not the substance of scholar phase. That's the dressing. That's the makeup. That's the spices. That's whatever you want to call it. The platter you serve it on. The frame that you hang it with. Those are things that contribute to it for sure,
and hopefully help facilitate it.
Sure, but that is not the it. That is not the artwork. That is the leavening, not the bread.
And so there's a reason why when we say read, and discuss a lot, that you get the read 3 times and the discuss only once, and the discuss comes after the reading, right? Because the essence of scholar phase is read, and discuss a lot. The discussion is powerful. The classes are powerful. Having a mentor who helps tweak that 10% that you aren't ready to fill, either in suggesting readings or in helping you to understand them, so powerful. Being able to discuss with peers and interact over the classics and the great ideas, so powerful. But again, all of those things are the discuss a lot.
Oh, and one of the hallmarks of youth is all of a sudden they start to think, and they think they know something. And they start talking about stuff, and they say outrageous things that are just not true. You got to get past the discuss, and read a little to the read, and discuss. Anyway, so that's a scholar contract. We'll give you some examples of stuff that we've used that are very basic. And I think if you watch and rewatch this and take notes on it, there's a few things that you might want to consider as you are having the dialogue about what should the scholar contract look like, and we'll give you that list in the body of this module. But things like driving privileges, expenses for car, phone privileges, and expenses, whether or not an allowance is called for, whether or not they're allowed to or encouraged to have a part-time job. When will they fill in the gaps? Where are they at in the hero education sequence? That's so important. If you don't have hero education, you want to see that because it will give you confidence on the path of scholar phase. In fact, Ian's presentation on the 4 years of scholar phase, don't miss it. It really will help you in this. What do they need to focus on right now? Is this a reading year? Is this a time for skills or not? Is this a year for autonomy or accountability? Anyway, lots of little ideas, and we'll include those in the body of this module, so you can make them part of your dialogue, make them a part of your mentoring brainstorm. Maybe your youth will make it part of their self-mentoring brainstorm, to be part of the broader dialogue and helping you to create a good contract that works for you. And again, you refer to it weekly in your interviews to discuss how it's going, and you not only scrutinize your performance and the scholar's performance, but ultimately on a perhaps less frequent level, 2-3 weeks or month, you review the contract itself and say, is this doing what we need it to do? Does it need to be changed or amended? Is it outlived its usefulness this way? Do we need to rethink it entirely? But just scrutinize that and make sure that you're still on track. That's the beauty of a scholar contract.
For youth, remember, a scholar contract is great for you because this is how you get to negotiate your autonomy to go out and study, to read, and discuss a lot. It's exciting, it's fun, because it's that opportunity to have that extra privilege, to have that extra, not just accountability or responsibility, but that extra, what's the word? Status, yeah, to be moving on to that next level in your position in the home. And then, of course, for the parents to remember, the goal here isn't to force them to study, but to allow them to study, to get yourself out of the way.
And that's our presentation on scholar contracts. Please let us know if you have any questions that we can help with.